Above all, do no harm. I think it's very easy to circle low-level errors and to write about what the reader thinks is wrong with the paper. Um, but it takes more intelligence and much more knowledge to do what will really help students, which is to name very specifically and point out very specifically what they're doing well. I recommend an older article, Donald Diker's article, Learning to Praise, and he takes some good ideas from Donald Graves, who uses a phrase, I like the way you, and points out specifically what the student is doing well. It gets away from, well, I like this, or it was good, to something very specific that you can point out. The way a student starts a sentence, the way a student organizes a paragraph, higher level things. And then another question that Diker uses in student response, and I think he got this from Graves, I'm not sure. Another sentence starter, I'd like to know more about. And then that focuses on things that students might want to add to make their writing better. But a lot of harm can be done, all with good intentions, by what teachers write on students' papers. And I think the most important thing is, above all, do no harm.
Well, I think the big thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about responding to student work is that you want to make sure that they understand that you're reading what they're writing. That, to me, is the big thing. Because if you can establish that connection between them as an author and you as an audience, it makes that rhetorical connection much more concrete in their minds. So they can see that you're responding specifically to the things that they're saying. And these can be really small gestures that you don't really need to spend too much time on performing. So for instance, it might be underlining something you think is interesting. If they say something funny, maybe you put a smiley face in the margin. Star something you want to talk about later in your comments at the end, or that you want to discuss with them in class. All of these things don't take very much time, but they let your students know that you're actually following what they're saying. If you're not following what they're saying, I mean, make a question mark in the margin, something like that. Something that you can use then to establish a further conversation, engage them in discussion. So that's, for me, is the big thing. And I think if you can create that small little gesture that shows, hey, I'm listening, it's going to go a long way in forming a connection with your students, giving them an idea that if they're listening, then I should be giving my best every time. The other thing that I would say that you should know about responding is that you don't need to comment on every little thing. In fact, less is more in this situation. If you were to comment on every mistake that you see, every error, every question you had, everything you wanted to bring up with the student, you're going to overwhelm them. They're not going to be able to know where to start for revision. So you can think about the things that you see in terms of higher order concerns and lower order concerns. Focus on the things that are the most important. Maybe bring up 2 or 3, 3 at the very most. 2 I think would be the best. Things that they can work on for revision. So, begin with ideas, engage those ideas, ask questions about what they're saying, challenge them. That's what I try to do. Whenever they say something, even if I'm playing devil's advocate, if I agree with them, I'll try and bring in a different perspective, suggest that they think about it in a new way. And then from there, when you move through the drafts, those you can go to the lower order concerns, the things that are not as important, I guess I'll say. Well, they're still important, but they're important on a lower level. So these would be things like organization, grammar, So when you get closer to the end of the semester or closer to the end of a writing process, then you might bring up a contextualized grammar lesson. I noticed that you always do X. Can you work on that for next time?
What you need to know about responding to student work is that you shouldn't try to respond to everything at once. That is going to take way too much of your time, and it's not going to be productive use of your time. And it's going to discourage your students. I can remember my own daughter bringing a paper home from college that her first year composition instructor had responded to. I'm sure that's what her instructor thought he was doing. There were very few words on that paper that hadn't been marked in some way. The paper was a mass of interlinear comments. His comments drowned out her writing. And she was in tears. She was a pretty good writer. She was willing to take criticism. She understood the importance of response to her writing. But she literally didn't know where to start. You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that to your students. If nothing else, that's going to make their mothers unhappy. So we need to find strategic and rhetorical ways to respond to students' texts. I try to develop with my students a shared vocabulary about drafts. I ask them to tell me what the text they're giving me is. Is it a proposal? Is it a discovery draft? Is it a draft to which they want me to respond, or is it a draft that they want me to help edit? In which case I'm probably going to have them give it to a classmate first. Or I'm also going to have them give drafts for response to their classmates. But I want to know, I'm going to follow their lead. I'm going to respond in the way that they ask me to respond, and that's going to be different depending on what kind of draft we're working with.
This is hard, but you need to respond to student writing quickly. I remember getting papers back from professors and not even remember having written it. The longer you wait, the further they are away from the project, and the less effective your comments will be. I think that when they say that students generally don't read comments, they just look at the grade. There have been studies done about that. The reason they don't look at the comments is that there isn't anything else they're going to do with it. And it was so long ago, they don't even care. So they look at the grade and throw it in their backpack. I think that it's probably more important to comment on drafts than it is the final piece of writing. And when I work with other professors, that's one of the hardest things to sell, because they think it's going to be twice as much work. It's not. It's much less work, because when you read the second one, you really do remember the first one, and the second one is so much better.